Beaten for saying no, she fled into the prairie. Until a cowboy took her hand, she had lived all her life in a small, dusty town where the wind seemed to carry whispers of everyone's business. From the moment she could remember, she had been told how to act, what to say, and whom to obey. Her home, instead of being a place of comfort, often felt like a cage. Her father was a man with strict rules and a sharp temper. Her mother, though quieter, never dared to challenge him. Every day was a careful balance of avoiding anger and trying to keep her small world from breaking. Her heart had always longed for freedom. Even as a child, she loved to run outside, letting the tall grass brush against her legs, feeling the wide sky above her like a promise. But at home, every little act of independence was punished. She remembered the countless times she had been scolded for speaking out, for asking questions, or even for dreaming aloud. Her voice, though soft, often carried more courage than anyone around her realized. Then came the day that changed everything. A man from the town had taken an interest in her, someone her family thought was suitable. He was older and rough, with eyes that seemed to hold more control than kindness. He assumed that her answer would be easy to accept because that was what everyone expected of a young woman. But when he asked her to agree to his plan, she could not. Something inside her, a fierce spark that had been growing quietly over the years, would not allow her to say yes. "No," she said, her voice trembling but firm. That simple word seemed to ignite the anger in the room. The man's face twisted, and her father's disapproval filled the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. She had expected arguing, maybe a long lecture, but not the sudden violence that followed. He struck her not hard enough to cause permanent harm, but hard enough to leave her shaken. The pain was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the fear and humiliation that followed. She felt small, trapped, and desperate. As soon as the moment passed, she knew she could not stay. The house that had always been her world now felt like a prison with walls too high to climb. Every corner seemed to hold reminders of what she could not be and could not do. She packed a small bag, taking only the bare essentials she could carry. A loaf of bread, a bit of cheese, a water bottle, and a worn blanket her mother had given her in secret one night, whispering, "Be safe, my dear. You deserve to be free." Her mother's eyes had filled with tears, but she did not stop her. Even in her quiet way, she understood that some chains were meant to be broken. As she stepped outside, the open prairie stretched before her. It was vast, endless, and frightening. The horizon seemed to go on forever, the tall grasses waving in the wind as if urging her forward. She took a deep breath, letting the smell of earth and wildflowers fill her senses. For the first time in her life, she felt the sharp thrill of possibility mixed with the fear of the unknown. She had never been alone in the wide open before, and now it was all she had. The first hours were the hardest. She had to navigate without a map, relying on instinct and memory. The sun beat down on her back, and the wind sometimes whipped dust into her eyes. She stumbled over hidden rocks and tangled roots, her small bag weighing heavily on her shoulders. Hunger and thirst began to gnaw at her, and every rustle of grass or distant bird call made her heart jump. She kept looking over her shoulder, half expecting someone to appear, to drag her back into the life she was leaving behind. As night fell, the prairie transformed. Shadows stretched long across the land, and the temperature dropped. She wrapped her blanket tightly around her, sitting in the tall grass, her knees drawn close to her chest. Stars dotted the sky in endless patterns, and she felt both insignificant and awed by their beauty. The loneliness was profound. She missed the warmth of her bed, the smell of home, and even the small routines that once felt restrictive. Yet there was something exhilarating in knowing that she had chosen this path herself. She was alive, and for the first time she was free. The sounds of the night were both comforting and terrifying. Crickets sang in the distance, and the wind rustled through the prairie grass. Somewhere far off, an owl hooted. She huddled closer to her blanket, her mind replaying the moment she had said no. The memory of her fear and the sting of her father's anger made her heart ache, but it also gave her strength. She reminded herself that courage was not the absence of fear, but moving forward despite it. Sleep came in short bursts, never deep, but it was enough to restore her body for the next day. She woke with the sun, feeling the cool morning air on her face. Birds flitted above, and the prairie seemed to welcome her with quiet patience. She began to walk again, learning the rhythms of the land, which grasses hid water, which plants were safe to touch, where the ground was solid enough to rest her feet. She started to feel a strange connection to the prairie, as if it were a companion, silent but watchful. By the third day, her confidence grew. She had learned to pace herself, to conserve her energy, and to pay attention to signs in the land that might help her survive. She discovered a small creek, clear and cold, and drank deeply, feeling the water bring life back into her tired body. She ate her bread and cheese slowly, savoring each bite. For the first time, she felt capable in a way she never had at home. Every step was a small victory, every sighting of wildlife a reminder that she was part of a larger, living world. Even as she gained strength, a quiet fear lingered. What if someone from her past came looking for her? What if she became lost in the prairie, unable to find her way? The uncertainty weighed on her mind, but she forced herself to focus on each task, each step, each moment. She reminded herself that freedom was worth the risk, and that the courage to say no had been her first, most important act of bravery. As the sun began to set on the fourth day, she climbed a small rise and looked out over the prairie. The land stretched endlessly, golden in the late afternoon light, with distant hills marking the horizon. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to feel hope. Somewhere out there, perhaps in the distance, was a place where she could be safe, where she could choose her own path. She did not know what lay ahead, but she knew she would face it. She would not turn back. That night, as she huddled beneath the blanket and listened to the soft sounds of the prairie, she made a silent promise to herself. She would survive. She would find safety. She would find a place where her voice could be heard without fear. And maybe, someday, she would find someone who could meet her not with anger or control, but with understanding and kindness. Until then, the prairie was her world, and she was ready to face it, step by step, with courage in her heart. The morning sun painted the prairie in shades of gold and orange, and she felt a small sense of pride. She had survived her first nights alone, faced the unknown, and managed to find water and food. But she knew that the real challenges were only beginning. The prairie was beautiful, yes, but it was also unforgiving. Every day required careful attention, courage, and determination. She could not afford to let her guard down. She began walking with a purpose, though she did not know exactly where she was going. The prairie seemed endless, with the tall grasses stretching toward the horizon. Birds flitted overhead, their songs light and free, but she could not let herself be distracted. She kept scanning the land for water, shelter, and any sign of danger. Even small details mattered: footprints in the mud, a sudden movement in the grass, the patterns of the clouds above. Each could tell her something important. Food was always a concern. The bread and cheese she had brought with her were running low, and she could not rely on finding food easily. She began to notice the wild plants growing along the prairie, some with berries or roots that could be eaten. She had learned some basic knowledge from books she had read as a child, and now that knowledge became her lifeline. She tasted carefully, making sure nothing made her sick, and soon developed a small routine of gathering edible plants and drinking from streams and puddles along the way. Water was her highest priority. The prairie was dry in many areas, and the streams could be hidden by tall grass. She learned to watch for signs of water, the flight of birds, the tracks of animals, and the greenest patches of grass. On one occasion, she stumbled upon a shallow creek, its water clear and cold. She knelt by the edge, cupping the water in her hands and drinking deeply. The cool water ran down her throat, giving her strength and hope. She filled her small bottle as best as she could and felt a renewed sense of confidence. But the prairie was not always kind. One afternoon, a sudden windstorm blew across the land. The sky darkened with dust and sand, and she struggled to keep her balance. The grasses whipped against her legs, and dirt stung her face. She pressed herself close to the ground, covering her eyes and ears as best she could, praying for the storm to pass. Hours felt like days as she waited for the wind to subside. When it finally ended, she was exhausted, with dirt in her hair and on her clothes, but she was alive. She learned that the prairie demanded respect and patience, and she had to adapt quickly to survive. As the days passed, she began to notice other signs of life around her. Rabbits darted through the grass, snakes slithered silently, and birds nested in the bushes. Each creature was a reminder that life could continue even in harsh conditions. She watched them closely, learning from their habits. She began to track the movement of animals to find water, and even discovered which plants the animals ate, helping her make safer choices. She felt a quiet connection to the prairie, as if the land itself was teaching her how to survive. Despite these small victories, loneliness was her constant companion. She missed the sound of another voice, the comfort of sharing a meal, and the warmth of a safe home. Nights were especially difficult. The prairie was dark and silent, except for the occasional call of an owl or the rustle of a fox. She wrapped herself in her blanket, hugging her knees to her chest, and let her mind wander. She thought of her family, of the home she had left, and of the small life she had dreamed of having. But she reminded herself why she had come: to be free, to live her life on her own terms, and to never again feel trapped. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she found a small hollow between two gentle hills. It was the perfect spot to rest for the night. She gathered dry grass to make a small bedding and used rocks to create a windbreak. She lit a small fire carefully, making sure it was contained, and cooked a small meal from the remaining bread and some berries she had collected. The warmth of the fire and the smell of food gave her comfort, and she allowed herself to relax a little. That night, as she lay under the stars, she thought about her future. She did not know what awaited her, but she knew that the choices she had made had been hers alone. No one could take that from her. She drifted off to sleep with a sense of determination, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new lessons. The following day, she woke to a chilly morning. Mist hung low over the prairie, and the grass was wet with dew. She packed her belongings and continued walking, her eyes scanning for any sign of water or shelter. She moved carefully, noticing small changes in the land. The way the sunlight reflected on a distant hill, the tracks of an animal leading to a stream, the colors of the sky hinting at weather changes. Every detail was important, and she learned to observe the prairie with patience and care. She encountered more challenges as she continued her journey. One day, she came across a steep slope that she needed to climb. Her legs were tired, and the ground was loose and rocky. She slipped several times, scraping her hands and knees, but she did not give up. Step by step, she climbed, focusing on the goal rather than the pain. When she reached the top, she looked out over the land below and felt a rush of accomplishment. She realized that each obstacle she faced made her stronger and more capable. During her travels, she sometimes thought she heard voices or saw shadows moving in the distance. At first, fear gripped her, and she hid in the tall grass, heart pounding. But she soon realized that most of the time, it was the wind, the movement of animals, or her own imagination. She learned to control her fear, to distinguish between real danger and imagined threats. This skill became essential, helping her make decisions calmly and wisely. By the end of the first week, she had developed a routine. She walked during the cooler parts of the day, rested in sheltered areas during the heat, and gathered food and water as she traveled. She kept her fire small and contained, using it only when necessary, and she learned to travel quietly to avoid drawing attention. She became more attuned to the land, noticing subtle signs that had escaped her at first. The prairie, once terrifying and unknown, was beginning to feel like a place she could navigate and understand. Even with these small successes, she knew she needed help. She could not stay on the prairie forever, and she longed for a sign that there were kind people out there. She imagined a safe place, a friendly face, and the possibility of trust. But she was careful not to let hope make her careless. She had seen too much of cruelty and disappointment to be naive. Her journey required balance, courage to move forward, and caution to stay safe. On the 10th day, she noticed smoke rising from a distant ridge. Her heart leapt. Could it be a ranch, a small settlement? She did not know, but it was a sign of life, and life meant hope. She adjusted her path, moving cautiously toward the smoke, keeping hidden among the grasses. She felt a mix of fear and excitement. If the people were kind, she could find safety. If not, she would have to rely on her wits and the prairie once again. As she approached the ridge, she saw the outline of a small cabin with a fence around it. A figure moved near the doorway, a man, tall and strong, working with the animals outside. She ducked behind a bush, watching silently, unsure of what to do. He had not seen her yet, and she hoped he would not notice her. Her instincts told her to wait, to observe, and to learn before making any move. She had come this far by being careful, and she was not about to change her approach now. She watched him for a long while. The man worked patiently, handling the animals with care. He did not shout, and he did not seem cruel. There was something steady and calm in his movements, a quiet strength that drew her attention. She felt a strange pull, a hope that perhaps he could be trusted. But she reminded herself to be cautious. Trust had always been dangerous in her life, and she had learned to protect herself. As the sun began to set, she found a small hollow nearby to rest for the night. She kept her eyes on the cabin and the man, but she let herself eat and rest. Sleep came slowly, her mind filled with questions and possibilities. Could she approach him tomorrow? Could he help her find safety, or would she have to continue on the prairie alone? She drifted into a light sleep, her dreams filled with images of wide skies, open grass, and the possibility of freedom. The prairie, once frightening and harsh, had begun to feel like a place of lessons, challenges, and hope. She had survived 10 days, faced danger, and learned to rely on her own strength. Now a new chapter was about to begin, one that might bring the help and kindness she had been longing for. The next morning, she woke before sunrise. The prairie was quiet, and a thin mist hung low over the grasses. She had spent the night thinking about the small cabin and the man she had seen working there. For the first time since her escape, she felt something unfamiliar, hope mixed with fear. Could this stranger really help her? Could she finally find safety after so many days alone? But she reminded herself to be careful. Trust was not given freely, it had to be earned. She waited until the sun had risen higher, casting long shadows across the prairie before moving closer to the cabin. Her steps were slow and deliberate, keeping low in the grass to remain unseen. She observed the man carefully. He was tending to his horses, checking their hooves and brushing their coats. There was a calmness in the way he moved, a patient attention to detail that suggested he was skilled and kind. She felt a flicker of courage. Perhaps this was someone she could approach, someone who would not harm her. Still, she remained hidden for some time, unsure of what to do next. The man paused and looked toward the horizon, as if sensing something she could not see. She froze, hoping he had not noticed her presence. For several minutes he continued his work, and she realized that he had not seen her. That small realization gave her a little relief and a little more courage. If she could time her approach carefully, she might be able to meet him safely. After a long pause, she made her first move. Keeping behind a cluster of bushes, she slowly walked toward the cabin. Each step was measured, careful, and cautious. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of fear and anticipation. When she reached the edge of the cabin's fence, she paused, unsure of what to say or how to introduce herself. Her throat felt dry, and her hands trembled slightly as she held onto her small bag. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Excuse me, sir." The man turned quickly, his eyes widening slightly in surprise. For a moment, she worried that she had made a mistake, that he might react with anger or suspicion. But instead, he approached slowly, his movements calm and deliberate. "Hello," he said in a deep, steady voice. "Are you lost?" She hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. I've been traveling," she said carefully. "I'm looking for a place to rest." He studied her for a moment, noticing the weariness in her eyes, the dirt on her clothes, and the small bag she carried. There was no judgment in his gaze, only a quiet curiosity and a sense of understanding. "You've come a long way," he said. "Why don't you come inside and have some water?" Relief washed over her, but she did not move immediately. Years of fear and mistrust made her cautious. I don't want to cause trouble," she said softly. "You won't," he assured her. "We all need a little help sometimes." With that, she stepped inside the fenced area, her steps tentative, but growing more confident with each movement. He led her to a small wooden bench near the cabin, offering her a cup of cool water from a pitcher he had brought. She drank deeply, the water soothing her parched throat and calming her nerves. As she sipped, she glanced around, noticing the simplicity and care with which the cabin was kept. It was modest, but it felt safe. They began to talk. He asked her name, where she had come from, and if she had been traveling long. She answered cautiously, giving only as much as she felt safe sharing. He listened without interruption, nodding occasionally, and his patience made her feel more comfortable. For the first time in many days, she felt like she could speak without fear of being scolded or punished. His presence was steady, and his calm voice was reassuring. Over the next few hours, he showed her around the property. There were a few horses, a small vegetable garden, and a corral where he cared for livestock. She observed quietly, noticing the care he put into his work. He moved with ease and confidence, handling the animals gently but firmly. Watching him, she began to understand why he seemed trustworthy. His actions matched his words, and that consistency was a comfort to her. He offered her some bread and cheese, similar to what she had been carrying, and encouraged her to rest for a while. She accepted gratefully, sitting on a blanket near the cabin as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The prairie stretched endlessly beyond the cabin, but here there was a small bubble of safety. She felt a mixture of relief and cautious optimism. Perhaps this was the first place she could truly feel protected. As the day went on, they worked together on small tasks around the property. He showed her how to gather water from a nearby stream, how to check the horses' hooves, and how to care for the garden. She listened attentively, eager to learn, and he was patient, explaining each step without condescension. The simple, shared work created a bond between them, a trust that grew quietly with each passing hour. By evening, she felt tired but safe. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the prairie, and the cabin glowed warmly in the fading light. He invited her to sit by the fire outside, where they shared a small meal. The warmth of the fire and the gentle conversation made her feel at home in a way she had not experienced for years. She realized that kindness could be real, and that not everyone sought to control or harm her. That night, as she lay on a blanket near the fire, she thought about how far she had come. She had fled her home, survived the dangers of the prairie, and now found herself in the presence of someone who seemed genuinely kind and trustworthy. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she could be safe, where she could be herself without fear. She slept deeply that night, the first restful sleep she had enjoyed since leaving her home. The prairie, which had once felt lonely and dangerous, now felt like a place of learning and possibility. And the man, the cowboy who had appeared when she needed help, represented something she had almost forgotten: hope. In the following days, their bond grew stronger. She learned more about him, about his life on the prairie, and about the challenges he faced in caring for his land and animals. He listened to her stories, her fears, and her experiences with a gentle patience that made her feel heard. He never pressured her, never asked for more than she was willing to give. Slowly, she began to let her guard down, realizing that not all people sought to control or harm her. She began to help him with more tasks, earning her keep with small chores and learning valuable skills. Together, they worked the land, tended the animals, and prepared meals. Their days were filled with simple routines, but each routine was a lesson in trust, respect, and cooperation. She felt her confidence returning, and with it, a sense of belonging. For the first time in her life, she felt that she could make a place for herself in the world. Evenings were often spent sitting by the fire, sharing stories, or watching the sun set over the prairie. He never pried into her past, but he was always willing to listen if she chose to speak. She began to feel a sense of safety and comfort that she had never known. Her heart, which had been weighed down by fear and pain, began to open slowly, allowing her to experience hope and trust once again. One evening, as the stars appeared in the clear sky, he offered her his hand to help her stand after sitting by the fire. She hesitated for a moment, memories of past pain flashing through her mind. But then she took his hand, feeling a connection that was steady and reassuring. It was not a grand gesture, but it was enough to signify that she was beginning to trust him, that she was beginning to believe that kindness and safety could exist in her life. In that moment, she realized how far she had come. She had fled from fear and danger, survived the prairie, and found someone who respected her courage and independence. For the first time, she felt a sense of possibility. The prairie was still vast and unpredictable, but she was no longer alone. She had found a companion, a guide, and a friend, a person who would not take advantage of her vulnerability, but instead offer support and understanding. As she lay down that night, wrapped in her blanket and listening to the soft sounds of the prairie, she felt a quiet peace. She knew the journey was not over and that challenges would still come. But for the first time, she allowed herself to hope. She had survived, she had learned, and she had found someone who might walk beside her as she continued her journey. The prairie, which had once been a place of fear and uncertainty, was now a place of growth, learning, and the first steps toward trust and connection. Days turned into weeks, and life near the cabin settled into a quiet rhythm. She had grown stronger and more confident in her movements across the prairie. She no longer feared every rustle of grass or shadow in the distance. The cowboy, patient and steady, continued to guide her, teaching her the ways of the land and the animals. Each day brought new lessons, not just about survival, but about trust and partnership. They worked side by side in the early mornings, checking the horses and mending fences. She learned how to notice small details, the way a horse shifted its weight, the sound of distant thunder signaling a storm, or the subtle changes in the wind that might bring rain. He explained things patiently, repeating instructions and showing her how to observe carefully. She marveled at how much there was to learn about the land and how much the cowboy understood it. With each lesson, she felt more capable and independent, yet more connected to the world around her. As the days went by, their conversations deepened. They shared stories of the past, though she revealed little at first. She spoke of her love for open spaces, her childhood fascination with the sky, and the small joys she had found despite a difficult home life. He listened with a quiet attentiveness that made her feel heard and respected. He told her about growing up on the prairie, the hardships of raising livestock, and the ways he had learned to be patient with people and animals alike. At first, she had been cautious, wary of trusting anyone too quickly, but his kindness was consistent. He never forced her to do anything she did not want to do. He offered guidance without judgment. Slowly, the walls she had built around herself began to soften. She began to smile more easily, laugh at small jokes, and share thoughts she had kept hidden for years. With each passing day, her fear of being hurt or controlled diminished. One afternoon, a sudden storm swept across the prairie. Dark clouds rolled in quickly, and the wind whipped through the grass like a living thing. Rain fell in sheets, soaking her clothes and drenching the cabin. She had been helping the cowboy move supplies, and they ran together to the shelter of the cabin, laughing as the storm pounded around them. Inside, they worked quickly to secure the animals and protect the garden. She realized that she felt safer than she ever had before. Even in the midst of chaos, she knew he would be there, and that gave her courage. The storm passed, leaving a rainbow stretched across the sky. They stepped outside to take in the sight, the air fresh and sweet after the rain. She felt a sense of wonder and gratitude. The prairie, which had once seemed harsh and endless, now felt alive with possibility. And beside her stood someone she could rely on, someone who had proven through actions that he could be trusted. Over time, she began to help more with the ranch work. She fed the animals, helped with planting and harvesting, and even learned to ride a horse with more confidence. Each task, though simple, was empowering. She realized that she was no longer the frightened girl who had fled into the prairie. She had become strong, capable, and resilient. The cowboy noticed her growth, often praising her efforts but never making her feel obligated. His support was steady and unconditional, a stark contrast to the fear and control she had once known. They also spent time talking about life beyond the prairie. He encouraged her to dream, to imagine possibilities for the future. She shared hopes she had long kept secret, dreams of traveling, learning new skills, and helping others who might find themselves in difficult situations. He listened, offering gentle advice and encouragement, showing her that her voice mattered and that her desires were valid. One day, a traveler came through the prairie, lost and seeking directions. She watched as the cowboy calmly helped the stranger, giving clear instructions and offering food and water. She realized that kindness was not a weakness, it was strength. She began to understand that she too could offer help and compassion, not just receive it. The experience inspired her, giving her confidence in her own ability to interact with the world safely and meaningfully. Trust between her and the cowboy deepened in quiet ways. Small gestures, offering a hand, sharing a meal, guiding her across difficult terrain, became symbols of safety and respect. They began to rely on each other naturally without words. She learned to ask for help when needed and to accept guidance without feeling ashamed. In return, she offered her own strengths, quick thinking, patience, and willingness to learn. Together, they navigated the challenges of prairie life as a team. Yet life on the prairie was not without moments of tension. One afternoon, she spotted a figure in the distance, a stranger walking near the cabin. Her heart raced, old fears rising. She froze, unsure whether to warn the cowboy or hide. He noticed her hesitation and calmly asked what she saw. She explained, and he approached the stranger carefully, assessing the situation before speaking. The visitor turned out to be a harmless traveler, but the incident reminded her that caution was still necessary. She learned that trust did not mean recklessness. It meant understanding risks and making careful choices. Evenings were often the most peaceful times. They would sit by the fire, sharing stories or simply enjoying the quiet of the prairie. She began to feel a sense of belonging that she had never known. For the first time, she could relax and be herself without fear. The cowboy never rushed her or demanded more than she could give. In his presence, she learned that respect and kindness were not signs of weakness. They were the foundation of trust and partnership. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant colors, the cowboy offered her his hand again, this time to help her step onto a higher rock so she could see the horizon. She took it without hesitation, feeling the warmth and steadiness of his grip. It was a simple act, but it meant more than words could express. She realized that she was no longer alone. She had someone who cared for her safety, respected her independence, and valued her as a person. Through these days and weeks, she noticed a change within herself. The fear and anxiety that had once ruled her life were slowly replaced with confidence and hope. She laughed more easily, spoke more freely, and took pride in her abilities. She realized that courage was not just in saying no, but in moving forward, learning, and trusting again. The cowboy's consistent kindness gave her a model of how people could treat each other with respect and care. By the end of this period, she had grown into a person who could face challenges with calm and confidence. She had learned to survive the prairie, care for the land, and build trust with someone who had proven himself worthy. Her heart, once closed off by fear, now held space for connection, friendship, and even the possibility of deeper feelings. She understood that life was not just about survival. It was about growing, learning, and building bonds that mattered. She also began to imagine a future where she could make her own choices without fear. She thought about leaving the prairie someday, exploring new places, and helping others who might face similar challenges. But she knew that for now she was safe, cared for, and valued. She had found someone who would not hurt her, and that alone was a gift she had never expected to receive. Through all of these experiences, she learned important lessons. Courage is necessary, patience is valuable, and trust must be earned carefully. She learned that being strong did not mean being alone, and that accepting help did not diminish her independence. She began to see that the world could be kind, and that safety and respect were possible, even in a place as vast and wild as the prairie. By the time several weeks had passed, she and the cowboy had built a routine together, working, learning, and supporting each other. Their bond was quiet but steady, built on shared effort, respect, and mutual care. She felt a sense of belonging that she had never known. She knew the journey was not over, that life would continue to bring challenges. But for the first time, she felt ready to face them with someone by her side. The prairie, once a place of fear and uncertainty, had become a place of growth, learning, and hope. And beside her was a man who had shown her that trust, kindness, and steady support were possible. She realized that the journey of building trust and connection was just as important as survival. She felt a quiet joy, a sense of achievement, and a growing hope for the days ahead. Time passed, and life on the prairie grew more familiar and steady. The young woman who had once been terrified and uncertain had grown into someone capable, confident, and resilient. She knew the land, understood the rhythms of the animals, and had learned to read the subtle signs of the prairie's weather. Each day brought new responsibilities, but she faced them with determination, finding satisfaction in her growing independence. The cowboy had become more than just a guide or protector. He was a steady presence in her life, someone whose care and patience had helped her rebuild her trust in people. Their bond had grown quietly, built on shared work, respect, and understanding. He never forced her to move faster than she was ready, never asked for more than she could give. In return, she offered her own strengths, attentiveness, courage, and willingness to help. Together, they had become a team, navigating the challenges of prairie life side by side. One morning, she woke to the soft light of sunrise spilling across the cabin. The prairie stretched endlessly, golden and calm, and she felt a sense of peace she had never known. She stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the fresh morning air. The land was alive with the sounds of birds, the gentle rustle of grasses, and the distant lowing of cows. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember the fear and pain of the life she had left behind. Then she smiled, realizing how far she had come. The cowboy joined her carrying a small bundle of supplies. He handed her a cup of warm water and nodded toward the horizon. "Ready for another day?" he asked. She nodded, feeling a quiet excitement. Each day brought new work, yes, but it also brought opportunities to learn, to grow, and to continue building a life that was truly hers. She no longer felt the weight of constant fear or uncertainty. She had survived the prairie, faced danger, and learned to trust herself and others. Now she could focus on building a life full of purpose and possibility. Days turned into weeks, and they continued to work together on the cabin and surrounding land. She learned how to mend fences, care for the animals, and manage the small garden. Each task, though sometimes difficult, brought a sense of accomplishment. She realized that independence was not just about surviving, it was about contributing, learning, and feeling capable. The cowboy encouraged her every step of the way, offering guidance when needed and praise when she succeeded. His steady support was both reassuring and empowering. As they spent time together, she noticed small, meaningful moments of connection. A shared laugh while feeding the animals, a helping hand across tricky terrain, or quiet conversations under the stars became symbols of their growing bond. She learned that trust was not given all at once. It was built slowly, through consistent actions and care. And with each passing day, she felt herself trusting him more, feeling safe and valued in his presence. One afternoon, while checking the fences along the far edge of the property, they encountered a problem. A small herd of wild deer had wandered too close, trampling some of the newly planted vegetables. She panicked at first, worried about the loss, but he calmly guided her on how to gently herd the deer away. She followed his instructions carefully, feeling a sense of accomplishment when the animals finally moved on. In that moment, she realized how much she had learned, not only about survival but about patience, problem-solving, and working with another person as a team. Evenings were spent around the fire, where they shared stories, discussed plans for the land, and sometimes simply enjoyed the quiet. She found joy in these moments of companionship, comforted by the fact that she no longer had to face the world alone. The fire's warmth, the sound of the prairie at night, and the steady presence of the cowboy offered a sense of belonging she had never known. She felt safe, respected, and free to be herself. Over time, her confidence grew in other areas too. She began to plan for the future, thinking about what she wanted her life to look like beyond the immediate tasks of survival. She dreamed of exploring more of the prairie, learning new skills, and helping others who might find themselves in difficult situations like she had. She realized that freedom was not just about escaping danger. It was about having the ability to make choices, pursue goals, and live a life aligned with her values. The cowboy noticed these changes in her. He admired her growing strength and independence, and he encouraged her in subtle ways, giving her space to make decisions while offering guidance when needed. Their relationship deepened, not through grand gestures, but through consistent respect, support, and understanding. She felt her heart opening to the possibility of companionship, knowing that it was built on trust, not fear or control. One day, as they worked together to repair a section of fence damaged by a recent storm, she paused and looked around. The prairie stretched endlessly, beautiful and wild, and she realized how far she had come. She had faced fear, survived alone, and learned to trust someone who had proven himself worthy. She felt a quiet sense of pride and gratitude. The journey had been difficult, but it had also taught her resilience, courage, and the value of connection. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow across the land, the cowboy offered her his hand to help her step over a low section of fence. She took it, feeling the strength and steadiness in his grip. It was a simple gesture, but it symbolized everything they had built together: trust, partnership, and respect. She realized that she was no longer a girl running from fear. She was a woman capable of facing the world with courage and hope. Evenings became moments of reflection and gratitude. She would sit by the fire, wrapped in her blanket, watching the stars appear one by one. She thought about her past, the struggles she had endured, and the fear that had once ruled her life. Then she looked at the cowboy, the land, and the life she was building, and she felt a deep sense of peace. She had found safety, independence, and companionship, all the things she had longed for but never believed possible. In the weeks and months that followed, she continued to grow. She became more skilled in caring for the land and animals, more confident in making decisions, and more at ease with herself. She began to teach herself new skills, read more about the natural world, and even explore small areas of the prairie on her own. Each new experience strengthened her sense of self and her belief in her ability to face challenges. The cowboy remained a steady presence, never demanding more than she could give, always offering support and guidance when needed. Their relationship flourished quietly, built on mutual respect, shared work, and trust. She realized that she could rely on him, not because she had to, but because he had proven himself worthy of that trust through consistent actions and care. One afternoon, they took a break from work and walked to the top of a small hill near the cabin. From there, they could see the prairie stretching endlessly, the sun painting the grasses in shades of gold and green. She took a deep breath, feeling the wind on her face, and smiled. She realized that she was no longer defined by fear, abuse, or isolation. She had built a life on her own terms with someone who respected and valued her. The horizon was wide and full of possibilities, and she felt ready to embrace it. As they stood together, she understood that the journey was ongoing. Life would continue to bring challenges, but she now had the strength, skills, and support to face them. She had learned the value of courage, patience, and trust. She had discovered that independence and companionship could coexist, and that kindness could be found even in a world that sometimes seemed harsh. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the prairie was bathed in soft twilight, she reflected on her journey. She had fled fear and abuse, survived the prairie, and found someone who helped her rebuild her life. She had grown into a strong, capable, and confident woman. She felt gratitude for the lessons learned, for the hardships endured, and for the trust and care she had found in the cowboy. She knew that her story was not just about survival. It was about growth, courage, and the power of connection. She had learned that life could be both challenging and beautiful, and that trust, respect, and patience could lead to a future filled with hope. As night fell and stars twinkled above, she felt a deep sense of peace. She was safe, she was free, and she was beginning a life that was truly her own. In the quiet of the prairie night, she took the cowboy's hand once more. It was no longer an act of hesitation, but one of partnership, trust, and hope. Together, they looked out over the land, knowing that the future was full of possibilities and that they would face it together. The prairie, once a place of fear and uncertainty, had become a home, a place of growth, and a symbol of the new life she had created. She had survived, learned, and flourished, and now she was ready for everything that lay ahead.